Hello, everyone. The title of tonight's episode is Mastery of the Ever-Present Will. Tonight, I wanted to speak about the clarity of our species and the ability for the willingness of the individual to become the fruits of the greatest collective effort. In life, only two things, two phenomena is born and two phenomena dies. There is the death of the self before the world, and then there is the death of the world before the self. When your inner world becomes transparent or fades into the accuracy of a concentration to the external world, you will become a presence on this earth. You will not be defined by your personality. The inner reality exists to keep the unknown alive. The outer reality exists to keep the known alive. These two dimensions are required for mankind's experience. And I'm not really feeling this song. Okay, what do we have there? What I feel I can contribute to you in this talk is a sort of explanation and my personal commentary on a unique relationship with the state of being I have found. I have administered my life, especially when I was younger, through the notion that I am this individual object that somehow has a mind and phenomena and questioning. So pretty much my awareness came automatic to my physical self. But life is very profound because it exists to switch you around. The caterpillar's existence is in some sense to experience many legs, but then the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. And so the evolution of a caterpillar and a butterfly seems to be a sort of response to the opposite of its design. So for me, there is an intelligence in this planet. This world is not just atoms hovering in empty space. You know, we may think that it's an illusion, but it's too sophisticated. If you look at life as a designer, fundamentally, you're a person that's not working with stories. Because I will tell you, what we call reality is an oscillation between meaning and non-meaning, between emptiness and fullness. Your consciousness is constantly thinking. Every time you blink, it's as if there's a sudden stop of the world visually. And this microsecond, kind of millisecond stop of the world is in some sense a signal of non-virtual existence. So pretty much I'm saying our system is designed to keep us dynamic between chaos and order. Just like how a bird has two wings, the mind requires chaos in order to function. primarily our knowledge is based on how we have ordered the chaos. This is a very fascinating notion, and I hope you hear it well. That our efforts, all that we call human knowledge, is a sort of random organization that began because one of, like, our ancestors began to plant a flag. And so consciousness is incredibly fascinating because consciousness appears through a sort of form, but it also occurs through the space the form is present. Scientists that seek only objective evidence, they can never prove their thoughts. That means you can prove it objectively, but you can never prove the thought. You can have no explanation for a creature that has opened its eyes in the middle of empty space. So knowledge was a bold move. A man once asked God, "Why am I here?" And after the silence of God had responded, the man began to hear the answer within himself. The purpose of design is only existential. But the purpose of moving design becomes experiential. You cannot have an experience if you're static. There's a sort of dynamism. The dynamism occurs when one phenomenon moves over another. So as I'm speaking right now, you can perceive your intelligence to be various winds from different angles intersecting at the same point. So one can say the sensory domain, the realm of our sensory perception, it is a non-stop data generation system, but it takes the objective and transforms it to subjectivity. So let me tell you the most immediate ability of the human being. We create a world behind our eyes and we allow the objective world to expand through our eyes. Do you see? We are the extensions, the conscious extensions of this universal sector. The ever-present will is a very bold statement because we fundamentally function as embodied temporary beings. Now, for me, the concept of eternity, I'm not just saying off the bat, yo, eternity, guys, we're eternal, yay, let's celebrate. You know, it's like, for me, there's a sophistication at work through a sort of world-breaking self-inquiry. As if a man asked a question so deep that the world broke. And that person who asked God, "Why am I here?" began to see it's because here is within man. The world is within your eyes, but you only see the objective world. You don't see your own eyes. That is the power of attention. Because I'm telling you, we're not here to just evolve in personalities. We are here to experience collective presences. That's in our evolutionary design, whether we like it or not. If we become a civilization that is too objectively focused, technology will become our collective presence. If we return to nature, an evolutionary return to nature, a way where a creature suddenly recognizes its bewilderment is from the lack of its natural environment. Like, if you take any animal, you take like a koala bear, you take like a lion that's running in the wilderness and you put it in a cage and then you analyze that lion, that's not a lion. You're not studying a caged lion is not a real lion. Do you see the situation? So we similarly are moments of wild, like we are the wilderness of nature, but suddenly we have found a sort of containment. And this is going to sound very intense, but I have a certain, I suspect that we, how can I tell you? Either we are not from this planet, or the planet is not from us. Do you see? The world is dangling between objects and subjects. Yet these objects and subjects present themselves in an instantaneous moment. In the instantaneity of the moment, you will notice there is some part of you that is watching your personality take shape. In every environment you go, your intelligence reacts. It responds. It begins to sculpt itself with the endeavors of the energetic expression occurring in that moment. You see, purpose, one can say that the purpose that you find the human being has is very different than the purpose the organs inside the body have. The organs inside the body are already in their position. They are functioning in accordance to nature's rhythms. For me, language is made to be broken, and that's why it fixes all of it. Ideology has one purpose only. Your subjective universe has one purpose only. And the purpose of your subjective existence is to remind your objectivity that if the world is in your eyes, the sky and the earth bow to man's presence. If your personality is Earth's gift, how you are here is the universe's gift. And so the sons of Father Time and Mother Earth gazed at the sky. And the children of such a bond, they either found themselves listening to their father, where reality was segmented through time into multiple dimensions, and infinity without time does not exist. Because if we do not have time, we cannot be a character in a world to even consider infinite worlds. Time takes a very important presupposition in the storytelling of our existence. Fundamentally, we are creatures that live not only in stories, but as stories. And I'm going to tell you something very profound, dear listeners. Something incredibly profound that I've experienced. I was watching this, believe it or not, it's kind of ridiculous, but I was watching this anime show called Angels of Death. And it's not for the faint of heart, but this show had a very important scene, a scene that I was metaphysically clapping for in some sense. And so this is very interesting. What was this? What was the idea that came across through this anime? Pretty much, there's this main character that believes in God. All right, I'm gonna lower the volume for this. So there's this main character. There's this girl named Rachel who believes in a God, and then her God is denied to her. She suddenly realizes the overall God she saw doesn't exist. So what does her psychology do? She instantly makes the man who saved her, which is a guy named Zach, her God. Do you see? And so he goes to this Zach and says, "You're my God," and she holds a gun towards this dude named Zach, and it's like a fantasy kind of story, a fictitious story, like this anime show called Angels of Death. But what happens in that moment is that this girl is holding the gun in front of Zach, this guy, and says, "Zach, tell me, are you my God or not?" And Zach looks at Rachel, this girl, and says, "No." And she suddenly gets shocked. She gets shocked because in the show, the Zach is like the serial killer that never lies. Okay? So what happens is that just look at her psychological development in this anime show. This girl started off believing in God outside. Then something happens. Zach tells her no, and then what Zach says, just listen to this, bro. Like what Zach says is that you are here, you are you. Don't make others make your decisions for you. You are here to be you. You make your own decisions. And that was so fascinating because in that one response from that anime character, from that, here's the idea. Rachel thought God was out there. That God suddenly became non-existent. She suddenly made Zach her God. She still wanted something outside of who she was to make her decision for you.
for her. And eventually, when Zack says, I am not your God, you are here to be you, she suddenly realizes, holy shit, our dependence as a species on God is often in moments where we feel we cannot make our own decisions. Divine intervention is required when we are not enough. Now, this doesn't mean we have to see the concept of metaphysics as void. This doesn't mean the mysteries of the mind are all suddenly known just because we have concluded this statement. But this means that the human being has this sort of inner need to have harmony and rhythm in its existence. We seek, whether you like it or not, whether you're the most laziest person or not, trust me, your mind, your mind has observed the highest elegance of perfection, and in some sense, the lowest pits of imperfection. Your mind is in the end and beginning at the same time. That is the purpose of memory. So what I'm trying to get to here is that the mastery of the ever-present will has nothing to do with your personality. So who is the master? Who is the able being that is no longer identifying, no longer contained, no longer like a lion caged by its own beliefs because it had no other choice but to just eat what it was fed? Whether it was the environment feeding it data or whether the parents were putting a spoon in the child's mouth? And so when stories break, the soul emerges. That's a good question. Mr. Nobody, I like your username, by the way. I usually leave at the end to answer questions, but I'm going to give you a very nice answer here. Does will even truly exist, though? Individual will inevitably finds itself a product of the collective will. What that means is we see our Earth is orbiting around the sun, and the suns of many galaxies are orbiting around this like vast like black hole or something, as science tells us. So for me, it seems that macrocosmic movement, macro means big, the big stuff, the big phenomena is influencing the little phenomena. So on some level, in two ways, we can prove that we don't have a free will. We're kind of all nature moving. But in some sense, I'm saying when you stop being a personality, when you stop I'm not saying completely, I'm not saying declare war on your ego. Like, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that there comes a moment where you suddenly realize you're not a thought. And when you realize you're not a thought, your beliefs no longer limit how your sensory perception behaves. So I'm telling you, your beliefs are suggesting your health because they are how far you're interpreting from your sensory perception. So the answer is that the conscious, known individual personality that is wondering if it has free will begins to recognize the macrocosmic will always be unknown. That ant under the rock can have as many theories as it wants on what human beings are doing, but it will never truly comprehend the human being. So in some sense, if we just take the objective angle, we are like a grain of sand, on an endless shore. That's the problem with objectivity. This is the issue with statistical evidence, that we can't index the whole cosmos. We can't check all galaxies to say, like, all solar systems, and say, like, there's nothing, like there's no aliens, This is something called Fermi's paradox. Believe it or not, I saw this in a TED Talk. So Fermi's paradox is the suggestion, like, this dude was like, where is everybody? And what he meant is that if life has emerged on our planet, how come there is no other life anywhere? Like, we're in an empty room in some sense in our solar system, The most beautiful thing that you can realize in this life is that you have entered this existence to be you. That means grant yourself instantly a freedom that is unfathomable by time. Because, how can I tell you this? Like, we've had Zen masters in history. A name that comes to me is Chung Tzu. Chung Tzu this Zen master wakes up one morning and it's like suddenly he's different, and all his disciples, like all his like his friends or whatever, like they come and see him and they're like they see Chung Su just in some kind of like frowned meditation or something, and they all come around and they're like, Chung Su, what's up? Why you looking blue? And what Chung Su does, he looks at his friends and he says, guys, last night I dreamt that I was a butterfly. And that experience of a butterfly was so real that now I don't know if I'm a butterfly dreaming I'm a human being or I'm a human being dreaming I'm a butterfly. This, I'll tell you what this man's tapped into. He's getting closer to his universal duality. That means, believe it or not, you can stand in front of any person and think yourself as much sophisticated as you want, but fundamentally, the way your mind, in some sense, generates. How can I tell you? If you notice, I'll tell you something fascinating when I notice this. If you notice every single day you wake up, how your past feels to you is different. There have been days I've looked at the past and I'm like, damn, this is such a long life, and I'm only 27. Jesus, like, there's been moments like that, and there's been moments where I'm like, life is too short. Kind of like cosmic responsibility still demands my manifestation. Like, I've had moments of that kind of thought. But in some sense, dear listeners, what I'm trying to tell you is that we start off we get convinced we are an object because we don't go past the sort of don't go any further beyond a sort of subjective acceptance. And this life is so fascinating, just like how you can zoom in on a grain of sand and see an atomic structure, a world of atoms. That's how life is. Wherever your attention goes, it in some sense divides to conquer, then realizes to unite. So here's the thing, because I'll tell you, the concept of ever presence is an immaculate idea. It's unfathomable. I'm telling you, before you learned language, you were a moment of intelligence. You were attributeless. But when language and activity and patterns began emerging through your behavior and how the world communicated to you, you got sculpted by the world. And most people who feel depressed, they are depressed because they cannot see further than how the world has sculpted them, and they don't realize that you reach a point in any study where you see those people who attain mastery, they're the same level as an explorer. They've reached the height of mediocrity. That means, I will tell you, you don't know how much greatness has emerged on this planet from boredom. you know and boredom, some people consider it not a very elevated state of mind, but for me, sometimes boredom can be enlightening. Sometimes boredom can bring justice to an empty simulation. So here's the thing. I'm a guy right now telling you that the life we think we know, to be honest, we're a biological body. This biological body is aware that it's here, and hence begins placing subjective symbology upon itself. Trust me, your thoughts are clothing. They are clothing of your mind. It is like there's a watcher within you. In ancient Vedanta, Indian tradition, for me, Indian culture, unfortunately, many cultures around the world, they sacrifice the wisdom of their tradition for technology. Mr. Nobody, I'm reading your comment, and all thoughts are out there at all times are accessible. Yes, I agree. Because, but let me tell you how I agree with what you're saying. I agree with it in the sense that this world, I have opened my eyes in a world filled with designs. However, based on how I see myself individual from all this, I can acknowledge other designs as different. So I'm saying it's a inner relationship that dictates all the different ways your intelligence classifies the moment. And the issue with the inner dimension is that from the outer dimension, like me looking in the mirror, I'll be like, yo, it seems like there's something, some mysterious intelligence looking out through my eyes that has nothing to do with the body, right? Like I get that impression, but I'm telling you, it's like you can't intellectualize a river that you're in. When you reach the deeper states of your presence, they can only occur through you learning to accept the changes of the world. If you can't observe change, you cannot observe the changeless. Because, how would I say it? Think of it this way. Edison invented the light bulb, discovered the light, invented the light bulb. Now think of before Edison did that, how many other people could have done that? So what I'm telling you is like secrets are everywhere. The treasures of the mind are everywhere. This is why man's mind in various moments has been able to create the value, the momentum of the moment so important as to see it as equal to God. For me, my relationship with thought was my 20s, you know, like my early 20s. What I mean by that is that it's kind of sad when I look at it, but for 20, not 20, but for like maybe 19 years, I thought I was a thought. I lived as a thought. I didn't pay attention to the outside world because I was cowered away in my inner life. I lived life with an arrogance where I was like, life should listen to my inner reality. You know, life, like the world I see, that should be the world. You know, I had that mentality. But life has a very beautiful way of breaking you. And when you get broken a couple times by life, you know what happens? You discover new dimensions to your energy. Mastery for mastery mastery for Lao Tzu, who was a very profound Chinese philosopher, and pretty much the symbol of a white beard of wisdom comes from Lao Tzu, I believe. You know, Lao Tzu was also Confucius's teacher, and he wrote something so profound that I consider it one of the most important have-to-read books on this planet. It's called the Tao Te Ching. And in the Tao Te Ching, there's many things said. But there's one thing in the Tao Te Ching that it was, I opened a random page of it and it was like action through inaction. And you begin to wonder about action through inaction, and if you think about it as through your objective self, it'll be irresponsible. You'll be like, what do you mean action, not inaction? I'm just gonna let, what do you mean action through inaction? I'm just gonna let the world burn, you know? And you begin to see what Lao Tzu meant by action through inaction is that sometimes a way out of an unnecessary state of mind is to, in some sense, stop the belief, stop the inefficient beliefs. That's the true power of rationality, when it's not truly directed at others to criticize them, but it is directed internally to perfect the character. I consider logic, rationality, and the advances of science to be very profound tools that we polish the intuitive design. As if your intuition is clay but your rationality is what is, in some sense, sculpting this stone. Michelangelo has this epic quote. He says, I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free. This dude saw a chunk of rock and saw an angel in it. Saw a fiction, a character of fiction. He brought it into life through a chunk of stone. And they don't teach kids about Michelangelo. Exactly. I am actually very impressed. Mr. Nobody in the comment section, we've said that. Silence speaks louder than words. Exactly. But silence doesn't speak. It is where all speech occurs. It is where speech enters the universe. When you realize the world of your thoughts it is kept alive by your attention to dynamic sound, when your attention becomes oriented towards stillness and silence, then the natural processes of your reality begin handling your mind. Right now, your mind, if you're stressed, if you're bewildered, if you feel anxious, if you fear death, your mind is in the domain of thought. That means you cannot, somebody has to logically bring you out of logic. And the only way is through you staring at the mirror. So what I mean by this silence and stillness can, I personally find that it arises, this sort of divine silence and stillness, through an acceptance of phenomena. It's an acceptance of reality. When you accept yourself in life, you're not just accepting yourself, you're accepting all the selves that you will journey through. You know, I to my friends and stuff, I find like some, you know, I find that like, how can I tell you, to people very close around me, sometimes I ask them how are they, and they said, oh man, it's been a good day. Sometimes they say it's been a rough, bad day. But when they ask me how I've been, I'll be like, this is one of those days where the chaos approached me more than the order, or the order manifested itself. And what that means is my mind found more harmony throughout the day, more of a rhythmic abidance with its inner and outer world, as if my inner reality wasn't resisting the outer reality, and my outer reality had already accepted the inner reality. I felt like a non-segmented being. Because we have two sides of the brain, so one can conclude that there's two ways our intelligence is, in some sense, expressing itself. Now, I think this is, of course, a generalization, but they say that, like, what is it? The left side of the brain is analytical, the right side is creative, something like that. And the right side, the right hemisphere of your brain, is actually handling the symmetrical behavior of the left side of the brain. The left side of your body is like controlled by the right side of your brain. I mean, I got to look more further into this, but the notions follow in that manner, right? And so what I mean by that is that if there's an urge inside the moment, in this current moment, if there is an urge towards a sort of creative outcome, and if part of your brain is creatively looking at things, and then a part of your intelligence, part of your brain is looking at things in a very analytical way, what that means is the hemispheres of the brain are working in alignment with past and future, as if the left side of your brain needs the past to exist and the right side of your brain needs the future to exist. And I'm saying this, of course, you know, language is a simulation. Language is kind of like drawing. It's kind of like painting. All words carry images within them, or they won't be words. You know, they just be ink on the page. You know. So I want to tell you something, because this ever-present will, another word for it is the divine will, and you find this in mystical traditions. You see, all the prophets didn't just exist with a book and it wasn't just they said words. In their universe, a sort of divinity was occurring. And when you really look at that theological aspect of existence, you wonder, okay, wait a minute, this dude felt he was the son of God. This dude felt he was the last prophet on earth. You know, and guys, I'm not being rude, of course. You know, I'm speaking of the past with a care for the future. But the way I'm speaking about it is that I'm saying that when you wonder about the inner existence of people, you don't have access to it unless communication gives it to others. You know, sometimes you shouldn't be shy because there must be a lot for you to communicate before that person can even see you in a world of agreement. Ludwig Wittgenstein has an incredible quote, Mr. Nobody. I'll tell you this. Ludwig Wittgenstein is, I believe he's a German philosopher, and he's one of those I pretty much honor philosophers because they weren't philosophers to me. They were explorers of the unknown of the subjective realm. So for me, Ludwig Wittgenstein, this man has this quote where he says, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And then 700 years ago in ancient Persian culture, we have this guy named Hafez, this poet, this very like kind of mystic kind of slash dash poet. You know, this mystic dash poet Hafez, he has a saying where he says, "The words you speak become the house you live in." Not only do you feel the energy from words, but if those words become your reality. This is why those people who know more than one language, their intelligence in some sense is open to two different ways that behavior flows through communication. But it doesn't mean you can only get it from speaking in a different way. I'm telling you that after you have learned from all the teachers externally, you will be left to learn from your inner teacher. And the task of every like I'm getting slightly bit irritated saying this, but every guru, every guy who was like, "Yo, enlightenment, everybody, nana," like all those super duper enlightenment guys, let me tell you what the issue was. If they failed to be a mirror, they were the greatest deception. Sometimes the truth bringers are deceivers. This is why when I started off, I didn't start off giving these talks, guys, by the way. For me, these talks kind of arose out of a preferenceless state. It was just like one day I just got a vision. I don't know how to tell you. Just the thought of this, all this came. And the reason it came, and I believe it or not, I went to India for a couple months in 2016, and there were some people there where I considered maybe they had a sort of awakened wisdom, and I asked them, what is this sort of like suddenly a person receiving a lot of thoughts, and they said this word, if I remember it, what was it? I'll tell you what the word means. The word is impressions, but sanskara. That's the Indian term. Okay. So what I mean by that, this sanskara thing, is that in some cultures around the world, they consider the subconscious to be the past life in some sense. What the Western world considers to be the subconscious, in certain other ancient cultures, that's what they see as the past life. In your think of it this way: draw a circle, you call that the unconscious. Okay, now you draw another circle in here, you call that the subconscious. Draw another circle in the subconscious and call that your consciousness. You see, your consciousness seems to be administered by deeper background patterns of not just how your biological DNA has come into expression, but how this interpreting mechanism, how your moment is in some sense translating itself to itself all the time. And when that becomes no longer dependent on a sort of temporary condition, a sort of eternal presence arises, in the sense that this eternal presence has no story, therefore it could never have been born. It could not die. But it is the watcher of change. So what I feel the center of the wheel of karma is the changeless. The wheel of karma is spinning around truth. The center doesn't move, yet the whole cosmos does. Here, I'll explain it like this. What is seen as karma is action, and action seems to be, in some sense, done by an identity. An identity seems to be just awake, just here, as if like we don't say what is the purpose of my atoms, but we say what is my life purpose. You see, our atoms, we don't care what their purpose is because to us atoms were just stardust. Do you see? So our concerns are all fundamentally in our bubble of knowledge, and I find true wisdom arises when you realize the world you see is not the only world. And Socrates understood this, and Buddha understood this. They all did. It brings true humility because the advantage of humility is clarity. Because a humble man is not lying to himself anymore. Like he doesn't care for lies. That means somebody could lie to him and something bad can happen. He doesn't care. He just doesn't care. You don't care about dishonesty because it divides the world into many characters. Someone who is lying throughout the day, what are they doing? They are creating different versions of themselves to others. Now there can be the argument that everybody's mind is creating you. So just like how some writers, artists, they've said statements in the line of once your artwork, once your uh, creative expression enters the public domain, it is no longer yours. And I was at first a bit like, I'm like, what does that mean? Like, but I finally understood it. What it means is that the beautiful thing about this world is that we're not just here to live in our own world. We are here to have, in some sense, satellites from our world enter the universes of others. That's the fascination. Language is a bridge between worlds. And genius is the ability to make the genius between two worlds practical. Yep. There's truth and lies. Wherever there's a lie, truth lingers, in the distance. Wherever there's truth, lies linger in the distance. The duality of the mind is endless. I'm telling you. The mind has an. Sorry, it's just a second. The mind can become God, but eventually the mind knows it is the mind, and a part of you knows what is you and what is not. I don't care about what people think of their intelligence level. I know. Existence knows how to exist, and that's why experience occurs. So now I'll tell you something very interesting. I find that the best way to use language is to be outside of it. And what I mean by that is that when I'm speaking to you right now, behind my eyes in some sort of invisible room that's in this objective room as I am now, in the inner walls of my mind, language arises through image. That means I see something behind my eyes and then I put words to it. And in that manner, it's like I don't structure the talk like some package I'm giving people. You know what I mean? The language evokes imagery. I tell you, think of an apple, like the idea of an apple just comes. This is why Sadhguru, this speaker online, he said something very interesting. He said the content of your mind. What was it? The content of your mind is not your choice. Something like that. But your choice is how that content is identified with. In this current world, the way I see modern society going is that we're in the era of political correctness. What that means is people are caring for others, but they're caring for others only in one-sided ways. There, throughout a person's life, throughout the day, throughout many moments, think of it this way: you wake up in this world, and your decisions are like strings that you pull, and you don't know where the ends of these strings lead. What I mean by that is that if you really look at what this life is, you are a changing view in every moment. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras said your consciousness, your awareness, what this thing is that we're calling soul, is like a glass orb moving around among many surfaces. The glass orb, its nature is not the color, but it takes the color of the surface that it is on. And we have Marcus Aurelius, in some sense a Caesar, saying this quote where he says, the soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts. Your attention builds your world. That's why Zen has to do, and meditation has to do with concentration. What meditators attain is a gentleness to allow the world to take place. Because if you have the responsibility of the whole world upon your shoulders, trust me, trying to change the world is not easy. Because yourself will die many times in the process. Your inner self. But one cannot die without in another dimension being born. Because in some sense, energy doesn't die. Like it's just, let's say your potential energy is like your life, and your kinetic energy is your, let's say the spirit realm, as like certain some shamanic traditions would say, the spirit world. People acknowledge that back in the day. The spirit world was in some sense, how would I say this? Okay, let me not stray too far. I think you're right, Mr. Nobody. I just read your comment where you said, I think that's the only way we can be happy, no more worrying. But I'll tell you something something that I feel few people truly hear when I say it. The world outside in front of your eyes, there is so much stuff. There is so much ideas coming off of those stuff that in some sense you are in like this endless infinite candy store of being able to choose positions on this in this moment, in this plane of existence. The beautiful thing about a species taking responsibility for its moment of being is that it reaches a certain point where it will see it cannot be responsible if it does not attain greatness. You become indirectly great because you are willing to live for a world that has lived for you. Living for others gives you strength. I'm telling you, it gives you courage. It gives you vision, inspiration. Just the thought that we can, in some sense, with our machetes, in some sense, this, like, what's the term for it? This tropical kind of rainforest, we cut through it as much as we can until the future generations come and they begin cutting and, in some sense, exploring the unknown. And so, my whole, how can I say this? These are ideas that I often share because I feel I'm alive once, and so is everybody else in the forms that we are now. And we're all individually living, but when we look at animals in nature, like groups of birds flying, like, schools of fish moving, herds of buffalo running, what we see is that individual realities have found a value through the commonality, and therefore they're, in some sense, synchronistic, rhythmic alignment just brings as if like you don't see the strength of one man, you see the strength of 8 billion men, 8 billion beings united through their attention on the better world that is to come. You learn from your presence eventually. That's what I'm saying. You think when you're young you know everything. The arrogance of the child is there. The inner child that thought it knew. That inner child dies when you realize you were never born. Conceptually, thoughts come and go. The moment is present. You are present before your personality emerged. Treat yourself as the whole moment of being, not just an aspect of it. Because I'll tell you, this whole world, what we call society, can very easily be seen as a play, as a sort of theatrical, as a sort of, they called it the Leela. What that meant is like pretty much how Shakespeare saw the world. Like everybody is acting. What that means is everybody is generating their expression. Now, as they generate their expression, they're in some sense locked into their own realm unless they listen to the natural sort of, you gotta abide by your design. Nice. Ah. Um, Mr. Nobody, I gotta tell you something, man. When I give these talks, they come through rhythms. And these rhythms are, I gotta either go with the rhythm or I gotta pay attention to the chat. So, like, give me like some couple of minutes. Let me just follow up these rhythms, and then, the reason these are live streams is exactly for Q&A. So at the end, I'd be interested to focus on exactly your viewpoint, how you see things, you know. But I have to say this. Our children's children will no longer be characters in a story. Our species will live beyond a subjective imprisonment of its own objectivity. You will begin seeing matter as matter, and consciousness, in some sense, is just an awareness. Purusha and Prakriti appear at the same time. There is a simultaneity between the known individual existence and the unknown collective existence. That simultaneity is the presence of the moment, which is in some sense your mind. If I tell you, show me your mind, it's not something you can bring on the table, your mind. Bodhidharma tried this. Some dude came to Bodhidharma, this a Zen patriarch in Japan of Buddhism. I believe he was the 5th patriarch of Buddhism. And pretty much somebody came up to him and said, Bodhidharma, I'm restless. I can't sleep. I got this very huge problem. Help me. And Bodhidharma was like in some meditation, and even though he stood up from his meditation, he didn't acknowledge the guy, and so the guy cuts his hand, legit, like this is in the story. It was shocking when I read too. But the guy cuts his hand, holds his hand in his other hand, looks at Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, I will be loyal to you, but you gotta help me because my suffering is arising from my mind rather than something physical. As if this dude's inner problems were so huge that he had become numb to his physicality. And so Bodhidharma stands there, and suddenly, even as if like this dude cutting his hand in front of Bodhidharma, Bodhidharma doesn't even acknowledge Like for him, it's like it's just there's a lot of ignorance in this world. And so in that moment, Bodhiyama grants this man an audience, and he looks at this what's his name? I forget the guy's name, but the the guy with the hand in his hand, and he says, "What is it?" And the guy says, "Bodhiyama." Exactly these words he says, "Bodhiyama, please pacify my mind. Pacify my mind." Bodhiyama looks at the man and says, "Okay, I will pacify your mind. But bring your mind in front of me and I will pacify it. Bring your mind right here in front of me. Put it like on the table. Put your mind on the table in front of me so I can see it and then pacify it." And this man gets shocked because an angle of perception has in some sense approached him like a tidal wave. He looks around, suddenly in his astonishment looks at Bodhiyama and says, "I don't know, I can't find my mind." And Bodhiyama looks at him and says, "There, your mind is pacified." And that dude suddenly, it said in the Zen story, like I read this online in the Zen story, it says that that guy got enlightened. And then he later on went to become the next patriarch of Buddhism. But what happened there was that this person recognized his suffering was occurring because of how he had accepted reality. And when he saw he can't bring his mind, he realized the mind was a thought. The source of his suffering was just his attention was on some abstraction that was unnecessary. This is why I'm saying there's a war of language going on. The idea is trying to consume the person's free will by saying, just believe this shape. Just believe this linguistic data. That's it. That's all you can be. Believe this. And then there's a part of that kind of lion who's in the herd of sheep that's kind of saying like, I must rise, I must rise. In some sense, like the lion is waiting for his roar his whole life. And he can't find it among the sheep. Until this older lion, as the ancient tale goes, comes and sees this lion like in a group of sheep, and it's like, holy shit, there's a lion just acting like a sheep, and he says, "Lion," and the lion doesn't respond, and he says, "Sheep," and suddenly the lion responds. And this older lion's like, holy shit, this lion thinks he's a sheep. And he takes the lion to the pond and says, "Look at what you think I am, and look at what you think you are." And that's the value of the mind. Be grateful for your moment. Because the proof of your divinity is your existence of now. You are on stage. You're on the stage of a lifetime. And therefore, what happens is very playful, because the moment that lion roars, he'll realize how silly it was and thought it was a sheep, and it was never a sheep. So you go from thinking, oh man, I'm incapable, all this stuff, to snapping out of ideology that you have decided to sit on. And you stand up from your thoughts into the clarity of your whole moment is your presence. And so the heart of man beats beyond thought. I declare it. So thanks guys. That was kind of like, I feel like so that's the end of the talk. Now, if anybody wants to share any thoughts, ideas, or anything, I'm definitely open to some dialogue. So, go for it. By the way, guys, the keyboard on my computer is kind of messed up, so I can't type in the chat, but I can respond vocally. Beyond language, it's unknown. That's all I'm saying. Reading for what aim? Mr. Know What, I just read your comment, bro. You mean like generally good stuff to read? Um, for me, I mean like I haven't read everything, but I know a lot of authors. I'll tell you this: the first time I went to, like, in 2013, I was really into Tibetan Buddhism, and what happened is but I was also not into a sort of artificial robotic way of trying to copying. I just the way I opened up to Buddhism was I went to a library, and this was in Toronto, and in some sense, I just went in there, bro, and I just choose random books. I went to this section and it was just all intuitive, as if I was not in that bookstore. I was not looking for my knowledge as a personality, because when you look for knowledge as a personality, tomorrow you're not going to care for it, because your personality changes in the next day due to the next environment and your energy levels. So you got to find the true interests rather than from momentary interests. And these true interests, I feel personally, come from your own study of your life till this point. So I'm telling you, trust your intuition, and I'll tell you, like, look for, oh man, I don't know if I can post the link, but Shri Ramana Maharshi. Shri Ramana Maharshi. I feel you might know him already, but like, yeah, you don't understand. The intuition is your natural presence. It's your true nature. It's like, would you rather want to learn from somebody else's like objective and subjective personality, or would you rather learn from the way your own intelligence moves? So the way your intelligence moves, it's fascinating, because regardless whether we like it or not, storylines intersect. So like out of nowhere, me and you are having this conversation, right? So I'm telling you this. Start off. I heard this, like, somebody said this and it was like life changing. First of all, okay, here. How would I say it? How would I say it? They said don't speak, don't have any thoughts. Not don't have any thoughts, but don't. How would I say it? Don't speak weak of yourself. Don't speak as if you like. How are people so certain that they don't know the answers to their questions? Because sometimes you're the only one who can truly answer your questions. I'm serious. And it's savage and it's chaotic, because sometimes you realize, you look around and you're like, holy shit, nobody has my eyes. Nobody in this world is looking at life exactly the way you are looking at it. Your eyes are your glory. Yeah. And you begin finding rhythms. So think of it this way. You know how when you trust somebody authentically, you suddenly see they will trust you authentically? You know? It's as if, so similarly, now think you are trusting your own intelligence. As if you have in some sense looked at the universe and roared at it in a way where you're like, universe, I am here once, show me the greatest performance of my own being. And in that state, it doesn't mean go with like some sort of like, like kind of like cosmic ego. I'm not telling to people to be Superman, but I'm telling them to realize how they have always been their own teacher. Nothing is outside of the mind that is being the woman. Stories are just the way we're dancing. I'll tell you there's what's a good book? Uh, what's a good book? I was gonna recommend some of my own books, but I haven't published them yet. But um, I Rumi's poetry. Oh man, I can't type it. I'll spell it for you. Rumi, and just search for poetry. And he has many poetry books. This guy's poetry is very profound. He's speaking as if the person writing, holding the pen, is an omniscience. It's not a personality. This man, like certain ancient poets, had such command of language where it was as if like you can call it magic back in the day. Because language was fresh. It was a fresh technology, and the fresh technology mean the first people who used language, they had the greatest use of it, but at the same time, they were also, they in some sense took away from the sharpened tool. Dude, yeah, my laptop, like, the keyboard doesn't work, believe it or not. Okay, so, let me see. Here, man, I'll just tell you some names. Check out Shiri Ramana Maharshi, Who Am I? Check out Papa G. He has this book called This. It's just THIS. And it's poems on emptiness. Um, there was a book called A Clear Mirror. And it's a Tibetan book, Tibetan Buddhist book. That book, I'll be honest, I didn't completely read it to the end, but there were many ideas in that book to like the halfway point I read that were very like catalyzing. Um, and I'll tell you this: just begin writing down a sort of what if responses to your own problems. You don't understand how much also you learn, like, from writing. When you write, you can study your mind. Okay, so I'll tell you something very, like, this is gonna be probably a terrible metaphor, but you know how they take, like, you go to the doctor for some reason or something, and you take, like, for a checkup or something, like a urine sample, and that urine reflects like your, you know, I guess, your body's kind of state. So it's one of those things where I don't know how to say it, but like your writings, terrible metaphor, but anyways, your writings reflect your mind, and you're gonna write something and then go read it like in a week from now, and you will be fascinated because your eyes will have totally changed. And the way Rumi is Rumi, the poet. Trust me, man, that poet was, on his death, on his gravestone, he says celebrate. Something like celebrate because I could never die. Like, it's like some profound, like, next level metaphysical, you know, Sufism. So, honestly, thank you guys for tuning in. The night is long, so I might give another stream in a little bit. Considering tomorrow, I mean, Saturday, but and thanks, Mr. Nobody, for like, your comments were actually, you were kind of keeping me like it was good. It was a challenge to my focus. Also, at the same time, commenting and speaking, so that was nice. Um, yeah, so thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and all this stuff. and seldom this is said, the presence of the moment is the ultimate mastery. Much blessings to Namaste. As much as words are built from a world, words also build words also build worlds.